Cops handcuff black woman captain for talking back. One call to Pentagon ends their careers. Captain Jacqueline Williams had faced hostile fire in 3 combat zones, but nothing prepared her for the cold bite of handcuffs against her wrists on American soil, all because she'd asked a simple question. "May I see your badge number, officer?" Stories like this deserve to be told. Before we dive deep into this story, don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell so you never miss another video that challenges perspectives and opens hearts. The day had begun like any other at the Pentagon. Jack, as she preferred to be called, walked the polished hallways with a confident stride that had become her signature. The click of her dress shoes against marble echoed her heartbeat. Steady, measured, controlled. 20 years of military service had taught her that control was everything. Control your expression. Control your tone. Control the narrative before someone else does. "Captain Williams," called General Harrison, catching her after the morning briefing. "The secretary wants those deployment numbers by end of day." "Already on his desk, sir," she replied. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before settling into a nod. "Of course they are." That was Jack's reputation. Always 3 steps ahead. She'd learned early that as a black woman in the military, she needed to be exceptional just to be considered adequate. So she became exceptional, rising through the ranks with determination that left colleagues both impressed and slightly unnerved by her precision. In her office, Jack studied the framed photo on her desk, herself at graduation from West Point, her father standing beside her, chest swelling with pride. He'd been gone 5 years now, but his voice still guided her. "They'll try to make you invisible, Jackie," he'd said. "Don't you let them." She never had. But the cost of that visibility was exhausting. No close friends, no serious relationships. Just colleagues who respected her work but kept their distance from the woman behind the uniform. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't forget dinner tomorrow. Bringing someone special I want you to meet." Jack sighed. Another of her mother's attempts at matchmaking. She typed back, "I'll be there." No promises beyond showing up. She packed her briefcase as the office emptied for the day. The drive from Arlington to her Alexandria apartment would be quick this late, just 20 minutes if traffic cooperated. Jack loosened her tie, allowing herself this small surrender to comfort as she left the building. Across the Potomac in a cramped break room, Officer David Harrington stared into his lukewarm coffee, trying to tune out the conversation around him. "So I told him, you can comply now or comply from the back of my cruiser. Your choice, buddy," Officer Reese was saying to appreciative chuckles. David kept his face neutral. After 7 years on the force, he'd perfected the art of presence without participation. He believed in the badge, still did, despite growing evidence that not everyone who wore it deserved to. His father had been a cop, his grandfather too. Service was in his blood. "Harrington, you're with me tonight," said Sergeant Walsh, dropping a set of keys on the table. "Miller called in sick again." David nodded, suppressing a groan. Walsh had a reputation for escalating situations that required de-escalation. Every shift with him was a tightrope walk between doing his job and preventing Walsh from overstepping. "Hey, you all right?" asked Officer Kimmy Lopez, sliding into the seat beside him after the others left. "You've been quiet lately. More than usual." David shrugged. "Just tired." It wasn't entirely a lie. He was tired of the growing distance between the job he'd sworn to do and the reality he witnessed daily. "The review board cleared Mackenzie yesterday," she said, lowering her voice. "Body cam malfunction, and all charges dropped." "Of course they did," David murmured, the knot in his stomach tightening. Officer Mackenzie had used excessive force on a teenager 3 weeks ago. Everyone knew it, but the blue wall held. "You ever think about doing something else?" Kimmy asked. David studied her face, the genuine concern there. Kimmy was one of the good ones. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then who'd be here to?" He trailed off. "To what?" "Save the world," she scoffed, but gently. "To try," he finished. David's phone lit up with a text from his sister. "Dad's birthday dinner still on for Sunday? Mom's asking." He texted back, "Wouldn't miss it. Tell her no blind dates this time." His sister replied with a laughing emoji. David clocked in for the night shift, checking his equipment with practiced precision. The weight of his badge felt heavier lately, like it was made of something denser than metal. Responsibility, perhaps, or doubt. "Harrington, let's roll," Walsh called from the doorway. David nodded, straightening his shoulders. One more night. One more shift of trying to be the officer he'd promised to become when he took the oath. Sometimes he wondered if that man still existed, or if he'd been slowly erased by compromise and silent complicity. As Walsh drove them through the streets of Alexandria, David watched the evening commuters heading home, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Among them was a woman in a dark sedan, military sticker on the bumper, driving with perfect precision. Their worlds were about to collide in ways neither could imagine. Have you ever witnessed something wrong and struggled with whether to speak up? What stops us from intervening when we know we should? Jack noticed the police cruiser in her rearview mirror 2 blocks before it activated its lights. She'd done nothing wrong, maintaining the speed limit, using her turn signal, driving with a focus that had become second nature. Still, a familiar tension crept up her spine as she pulled over on the quiet residential street. She did everything by the book. Hands visible on the steering wheel. Interior light switched on. Window rolled down. License and registration ready, but not reached for until instructed. 20 years of being black in America had taught her this dance as thoroughly as the military had taught her protocol. 2 officers approached, one on each side of her car. The older one, heavy-set with thinning hair and a face mapped with broken capillaries, leaned toward her window. "License and registration," he said, flashlight beam sweeping across her face, momentarily blinding her. "May I ask why I've been stopped, officer?" Jack kept her voice neutral, professional. "License and registration first," he repeated, voice hardening slightly. Jack reached slowly for her glove compartment. "I'm reaching for my registration," she narrated, then retrieved her wallet from her purse. "Now getting my license." She handed both items over, noting the name on the officer's badge. Walsh. Walsh examined her license, his expression shifting subtly when he saw her military ID. "Captain Williams," he said, emphasis suggesting skepticism rather than respect. "Where are you coming from, Captain?" "The Pentagon. I'm heading home." The second officer, younger, taller, with careful eyes, stood at the passenger window, watching silently. "You know why we stopped you?" Walsh asked. "No, sir, I don't." Tail lights out. Walsh's flashlight moved to the rear of her car. Jack frowned. "That's not possible. My car had its annual inspection 3 weeks ago." "Are you calling me a liar, Captain?" Walsh's tone sharpened. "No, sir. I'm stating a fact about my vehicle. Step out of the car, please." The request, no, the order, hung in the air between them. Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. "May I ask why that's necessary?" "Out of the car." Each word deliberate, threatening. Jack unlocked her door, movements measured. As she stepped out, she noticed the younger officer's expression, concern flashing across his features before disappearing behind professional neutrality. "Officer Walsh," she said carefully, "I'd like to understand why." "Turn around, hands on the vehicle," Walsh interrupted. "This isn't necessary," Jack said, hearing her heart in her ears now. "If there's an issue with my taillight, I'll address it immediately." "You've been drinking tonight?" Walsh asked, ignoring her statement. "No, I have not." "Because you're slurring your words, and I detect the odor of alcohol." Jack stared at him, incredulous. "That's absolutely false." "And now you're being argumentative," Walsh continued, as if reading from a script. "Failure to comply." "Officer," the younger cop interjected, "I don't think." "Not now, Harrington," Walsh snapped. Jack met Harrington's eyes briefly before turning back to Walsh. "Officer Walsh, I'd like your badge number, please." Something in Walsh's expression hardened. "That's it. Hands behind your back." "What?" Jack couldn't believe what was happening. "On what grounds?" "Interfering with an officer. Disorderly conduct. Take your pick." Before she could protest further, Walsh grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into her skin as he secured first one wrist, then the other. "This is completely unwarranted," Jack said, struggling to maintain her composure. "I am an active-duty military officer who has done nothing wrong." "Should have thought about that before you started talking back," Walsh said, the satisfaction in his voice unmistakable. Jack looked to Officer Harrington, who appeared frozen in place, conflict etched across his face. "Officer Harrington," she said directly, "you are witnessing this. I want your badge number as well." Harrington hesitated, then stated his number clearly. Walsh shot him a look of disgust. "You have the right to remain silent," Walsh began, reciting Miranda rights as if this were a legitimate arrest. "Officer Walsh," Harrington interrupted, his voice low but firm. "A word." Walsh ignored him, continuing the recitation while guiding Jack toward the police cruiser. The humiliation burned through her like acid, standing handcuffed on a public street, neighbors potentially watching from behind curtained windows. "Walsh," Harrington said more forcefully. "Radio." Something in his tone made Walsh pause. They stepped a few feet away, still keeping Jack in view. "This is a mistake," Harrington said, voice low but intense enough for Jack to hear. "She's done nothing wrong." "She was non-compliant and disrespectful," Walsh countered. "She asked reasonable questions. This won't hold up, and you know it." "You questioning my judgment, Harrington?" "I'm suggesting we verify the taillight and issue a warning if necessary." The tension between them was palpable. Jack stood straight, refusing to bend despite the discomfort of the cuffs. Her military training had prepared her for physical pain, but not for this particular form of degradation. After what felt like an eternity, Walsh approached her again. "It seems we have a misunderstanding," he said, no apology in his tone. "I'm going to remove these, but consider this a warning about your attitude." As the cuffs came off, Jack rubbed her wrists, noting the red marks left behind. "Officer Walsh, I will be filing a formal complaint about this encounter." Walsh smirked. "Good luck with that." He handed back her license and registration before returning to the cruiser. Harrington lingered for a moment. "I apologize for this," he said quietly. Jack met his gaze. "Apologies without action are meaningless, Officer Harrington." His eyes, hazel with flecks of gold visible even in the dim streetlight, registered something like recognition. Not of her face, but perhaps of her words, her meaning. "Drive safely, Captain," he said finally, before following his partner. As Jack watched the cruiser pull away, her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from rage. She was Captain Jacqueline Williams, Pentagon officer with top-secret clearance, decorated combat veteran. And none of that had mattered in the face of a badge wielded like a weapon. She took 3 deep breaths, steadying herself. Then she reached for her phone. This would not stand. Not this time. For his part, David Harrington sat in silence as Walsh drove, listening to his partner's self-congratulatory monologue about teaching respect. All he could see was the captain's face, her dignity intact despite Walsh's best efforts to strip it from her. And all he could hear was his own silence, broken too late to prevent her humiliation. Both knew that something fundamental had changed in those brief moments on a quiet Alexandria street, though neither could have predicted how those changes would eventually bind their lives together. The Pentagon hallways seemed narrower the next morning, as if the walls themselves were conspiring to contain Jack's fury. She'd spent the night researching police complaint procedures, officer accountability mechanisms, and department regulations. Sleep had been an afterthought. "You look like hell," observed Lieutenant Colonel Diaz, falling into step beside her. Thanks for noticing, Jack replied dryly. Serious, though, everything okay? Jack hesitated. Diaz was as close to a friend as she had in the building, which wasn't saying much. Military relationships maintained professional boundaries by design. Had an encounter with Alexandria PD last night, she said finally. Apparently asking for a badge number is talking back and warrants handcuffs. Diaz stopped walking. You're kidding. Wish I were. Did you file a complaint? Working on it now. Heading to legal for guidance. Diaz's expression darkened. Talk to Simmons in legal. He has connections at Alexandria PD. And Jack. Document everything, now, while it's fresh. Jack nodded, grateful for the support but already retreating into the fortress of her own determination. She didn't need help. She needed justice. In legal, Commander Simmons listened without interruption as Jack recounted the previous night's events. His face remained impassive, but his pencil tapped an increasingly agitated rhythm against his legal pad. Officer Walsh, he repeated when she finished. And Officer Harrington was present but didn't intervene until after you were cuffed. That's correct. Simmons leaned back. This isn't the first complaint against Walsh. He has a pattern. You have access to their records? Let's just say I have colleagues who share concerns about certain officers. Simmons met her gaze. What do you want from this, Captain? The question caught her off guard. What did she want? The answer came immediately. Accountability. Not revenge. Jack considered this. Is there a difference? Enormous, Simmons said. Revenge burns everything, including the hand that strikes the match. Accountability creates change. He pulled a form from his desk. I'll make some calls. In the meantime, file this officially. Be precise. Be factual. Jack took the form, already mentally composing the report. Thank you, Commander. Captain, Simmons called as she reached the door. Fair warning, the blue wall is real. This won't be easy. Jack straightened her shoulders. Few important things are. The locker room at Alexandria PD headquarters hummed with pre-shift conversations when David arrived. He'd barely slept, the captain's words echoing in his head. Apologies without action are meaningless. He'd spent years offering empty apologies, to himself mostly, for the small compromises that had accumulated like sediment, gradually burying the idealistic rookie he'd once been. Harrington! Walsh's voice boomed across the room. What the hell was that last night? Conversations hushed as officers turned to watch. David continued changing into his uniform, movements deliberate. What was what? He asked, though he knew perfectly well. Undermining me in front of that uppity. Careful, David interrupted, surprising himself with his sharpness. That uppity woman is a military officer who did nothing wrong. Walsh stepped closer. Since when do you decide what's wrong? You follow my lead out there. David finished buttoning his shirt before responding. Not when the lead is heading off a cliff. A few officers chuckled nervously. Walsh's face reddened. You got a problem with how I handle civilians. Take it to the sergeant. Maybe I will, David said quietly. Walsh snorted. Good luck with that. 20 years on the force buys a lot of benefit of the doubt. You're what, 7? Doesn't. He walked away, leaving David with the uncomfortable attention of his colleagues. Only Kimmy approached afterward. What happened? She asked, keeping her voice low. David hesitated. Talking about another officer violated the unwritten code. But the weight of silence was becoming unbearable. Walsh handcuffed a woman for asking for his badge number, he said finally. Military officer. No violation. No reason. Kimmy winced. And you said something? Not enough. Not soon enough. You said something, she repeated, emphasis on the action itself. That's more than most would do. David closed his locker. I'm filing a report. Kimmy's eyes widened. David, I know. They'll make your life hell. They already are. He managed a grim smile, just in more subtle ways. At his desk, David stared at the incident report form on his computer screen. The cursor blinked accusingly in the blank narrative field. One version of events would maintain peace with his colleagues. Another version would accurately describe what happened. For 7 years, he convinced himself that the system would eventually correct itself if good officers just stayed the course. Now he wondered if good officers, who remained silent, were officers at all. He began typing, documenting Walsh's fabricated reason for the stop, the unnecessary escalation, the handcuffing without cause. When finished, he read it twice, knowing what it would cost him. Then he clicked submit. Sergeant Royce appeared at his desk 20 minutes later. My office. Now. David followed him into the small glass-walled room, aware of eyes tracking their movement across the bullpen. Royce closed the door. What the hell is this, Harrington? My incident report, sir. This directly contradicts Walsh's account. I'm aware. Royce studied him. You know what happens to officers who can't be trusted to have their partners' backs? They get ostracized, David said evenly. Passed over for promotion. Given the worst assignments. Eventually forced out. So why are you doing this? David considered the question. Because none of that is worse than what I'd be doing to myself if I didn't. Royce sighed heavily. I'm putting this report on hold pending review. That's your prerogative, sir. But just so you know, the captain mentioned filing a formal complaint. There will be an investigation regardless. Something flickered across Royce's face. Concern, perhaps, or calculation. Walsh has friends in high places. So might she, David replied. That evening, Jack sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. She'd filed her complaint with Alexandria PD that afternoon. Commander Simmons had called his contact, a Deputy Chief Richardson, who promised to look into the matter personally. Jack didn't trust promises. She trusted action. Her finger hovered over a contact. Major General Lawrence, her direct superior and someone who owed her a favor after she'd salvaged a logistics disaster during his congressional testimony last year. One call could set wheels in motion that would end careers. Was that what she wanted? She thought of Officer Walsh's smirk as he'd removed the handcuffs. The casual cruelty and absolute certainty that there would be no consequences. How many others had experienced the same treatment without the rank or connections to fight back? She thought too of Officer Harrington, his visible discomfort, his delayed intervention. Was silence in the face of wrongdoing any better than participation? Her father would have said no. Jack pressed the contact and raised the phone to her ear. General Lawrence? It's Captain Williams. I need to discuss something urgent. It's about an incident last night involving Alexandria police. As she detailed the encounter, she felt a curious mix of satisfaction and unease. Justice required attention. But would this create change, or merely punishment? Across town, David sat in his parked car outside his apartment building, equally conflicted. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Walsh and 1 text from Kimmy. Everyone knows. Watch your back. He thought of Captain Williams standing handcuffed on that street corner, her dignity a rebuke to their actions. He thought of all the times he'd looked away, justified inaction, chosen the path of least resistance. The weight of those accumulated choices felt suddenly unbearable. Tomorrow would bring consequences. For now, both Jack and David sat alone with their decisions, wondering if the price of integrity would ultimately prove too high. 3 days later, Jack sat in an austere conference room at Alexandria Police Headquarters, back straight, expression neutral. Across the table, Internal Affairs Lieutenant Maria Guzman reviewed a folder with methodical precision. "Thank you for coming in, Captain Williams," Guzman said finally. "Your complaint has been given priority status." I appreciate that, Jack replied carefully. Though I'm curious why. Guzman's expression revealed nothing. Let's just say there's been interest from multiple quarters. Jack nodded, understanding the subtext. General Lawrence had made calls. We'll be conducting interviews with both officers today, Guzman continued. I'd like to review your statement once more before we proceed. As Jack recounted the incident again, the door opened. She faltered mid-sentence as Officer David Harrington entered, followed by a man in a suit who Jack presumed was a union representative. Sorry to interrupt, Harrington said, his eyes meeting Jack's briefly before looking away. We were told to report at 11. You're early, Guzman observed. Please wait outside. Actually, the suited man interjected, since Officer Harrington submitted his own report that conflicts with Officer Walsh's account, we'd prefer he be present for any further statements. Guzman frowned but nodded. Very well. Jack studied Harrington as he took a seat at the far end of the table. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth. The man who had stood by during her humiliation had apparently found his voice afterward. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. Please continue, Captain, Guzman prompted. Jack resumed her account, acutely aware of Harrington's presence. When she described the handcuffing, she noticed him wince slightly. Officer Harrington, Guzman said when Jack finished, your report indicates you believed there was no justification for detaining Captain Williams. Is that accurate? Yes, ma'am, he replied, voice steady despite the union rep's warning glance. Yet you waited until after she was handcuffed to intervene. Why? Harrington shifted uncomfortably. I should have spoken up sooner. That's on me. That doesn't answer my question. He met Guzman's gaze directly. Police culture discourages contradicting your partner, especially in front of civilians. It's not an excuse. It's an explanation. Jack found herself unexpectedly moved by his honesty. Guzman made a note. Officer Walsh will be interviewed separately. Captain Williams, we'll need you to remain available today in case additional questions arise. We have a room where you can wait. Jack checked her watch. I have meetings at the Pentagon this afternoon. This won't take long, Guzman assured her. Officer Harrington will need to stay as well. You can wait together. Jack wanted to object but recognized the strategic value of having both witnesses isolated from Walsh and anyone who might influence their statements. They were escorted to a small room with a table, chairs, and not much else. The door closed behind them with a definitive click. Silence stretched between them. Jack remained standing, unwilling to settle in for what felt like a deliberate forcing of proximity. I filed my report before your complaint came in, Harrington said finally. Just so you know. Jack glanced at him. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. And that suddenly became important to you after the fact? The words came out sharper than intended. Harrington accepted them without defense. I deserve that, he acknowledged. I should have stopped it sooner. Yes, you should have. More silence. For what it's worth, he said, this isn't my first report against Walsh. Just the first one that wasn't buried. Jack's curiosity overcame her anger. What changed? You, he said simply. Your rank. Your connections. The fact that you weren't intimidated. So if I'd been a civilian without Pentagon access, this would be business as usual? Harrington flinched at the truth of it. Probably. Systems broken that way. Systems don't break themselves, Officer Harrington. People break them. Or allow them to be broken. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. David. My name is David. Jack remained silent, unwilling to offer the familiarity of her own first name in return. She moved to the window, looking out at the police cruisers in the parking lot. Have you experienced consequences? She asked after a moment. For filing your report. Some, he admitted. Colleagues not talking to me. Undesirable assignments. The usual. The blue wall of silence. More like the blue wall of making your life miserable until you fall in line, he said with a hint of dry humor. But I'm done falling in line. Jack turned to study him. The man before her didn't match her initial impression of a passive bystander. There was something genuine in his weariness, his resignation, and paradoxically, his determination. "Why stay?" she asked. "If it's that toxic?" David considered the question. "Same reason you serve, I imagine. Belief that what we do matters. That we can make things better, not worse." "That's presumptuous," Jack said, though without heat. "You don't know why I serve." "Fair enough. Why do you?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. Most people didn't ask, and she rarely volunteered. "My father was military," she said after a pause. "He believed in service. In protecting something larger than yourself." "Was. He died 5 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," David said, and the simple sincerity in his voice disarmed her slightly. "Why did you become a police officer?" she asked, deflecting attention from herself. "Family tradition. Father. Grandfather. I grew up believing it was the most honorable profession." A shadow crossed his face. "Reality's been complicated." The door opened before Jack could respond. An administrative assistant informed them that Officer Walsh's interview was taking longer than expected. They might be waiting a while. When they were alone again, an awkward silence descended. Jack reluctantly took a seat, acknowledging they might be here for some time. "Have you eaten?" David asked suddenly. Jack realized she hadn't, having come straight from morning meetings. "No. There's a decent cafeteria downstairs. Not Pentagon quality, I'm sure, but better than nothing." The idea of sharing a meal with this man seemed strange, yet the alternative, sitting in strained silence for hours, was worse. "Lead the way," she said. The cafeteria was nearly empty at the late morning hour. They selected sandwiches and coffee, finding a corner table away from the few officers present, who eyed David with obvious disapproval. "Popular, aren't you?" Jack observed. "I'm the cautionary tale of the week," he replied, unwrapping his sandwich. "What happens when you don't protect your own?" "Is that how they see it? Not as holding each other accountable?" "Accountability threatens the whole structure," David said. "If we admit one officer can abuse power, we have to consider they all might. Including ourselves." Jack found herself unexpectedly engaged by his perspective. "That's surprisingly insightful." "Don't sound so surprised," he said with the ghost of a smile. "Some of us can think and wear a badge simultaneously." Despite herself, Jack felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. "Apparently." They ate in what gradually became a less uncomfortable silence. Jack observed him surreptitiously, the careful way he spoke, the thoughtfulness behind his comments. Not at all the mindless enforcer she'd initially categorized him as. "Can I ask you something?" David said as they finished eating. Jack nodded cautiously. "What happens after this? With your complaint?" "That depends on the investigation." "And if they find Walsh at fault?" Jack considered her answer carefully. Justice should be proportional. His actions were humiliating but not physically harmful. I'd expect appropriate disciplinary action, not career destruction. David studied her. "That's measured. Especially given what happened. What did you expect? That I'd want blood? Some would." "I'm not interested in revenge," Jack said, echoing Commander Simmons' distinction. "I want accountability. I want officers like Walsh to think twice before abusing their authority. And I want officers like you to think harder about when to speak up." Her phone buzzed with a text from General Lawrence. "Deputy Chief called me directly. Taking this very seriously. Keep me posted." David noticed her expression change as she read the message. Everything okay? Fine, she said, putting the phone away. Just checking in from work. They were summoned back to the conference room an hour later. Lieutenant Guzman informed them that Officer Walsh had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. They would both need to provide formal statements to a review board the following week. You'll be seeing more of each other, Guzman concluded. I suggest you find a way to be comfortable with that. Outside the building, they paused awkwardly. I can give you a ride if you need one, David offered. Jack shook her head. I have my car. But, thank you. She hesitated, then extended her hand. Jacqueline Williams. Jack to most people. He took her hand, his grip firm but not overpowering. David Harrington. Dave to almost no one. A smile, small but genuine, crossed her face. See you at the review board, Officer Harrington. I'll be there, Captain Williams. As they went their separate ways, both felt the strange shift that had occurred, from adversaries to reluctant allies in a process neither had anticipated. The investigation would force them together again, but something beyond obligation had begun to take root in that sterile waiting room. Something neither was quite ready to name. What assumptions do we make about others based on their uniforms or positions? How might our perspectives change if we were forced to see beyond those initial judgments? The police department's conference room felt smaller the second time. Jack arrived early for the review board hearing, preferring to gather her thoughts in solitude before the proceedings began. She hadn't expected to find David already there, standing at the window with a paper cup of coffee, staring out at the gray morning. You're early, she observed. He turned, offering a tired smile. Couldn't sleep. Figured I might as well be unproductive here instead of at home. Something in his disheveled appearance, the loosened tie, the shadows under his eyes, suggested more than simple insomnia. Rough night? She asked, setting her briefcase on the table. David hesitated then. Walsh's partner came by my apartment. Suggested I might want to reconsider my statement. Jack's eyes narrowed. Are you being threatened? Let's call it strongly encouraged to remember things differently. He sipped his coffee. Don't worry. I'm not changing my account. I wasn't worried, Jack said, though she realized with surprise that she had been, if only momentarily. Liar, he replied with unexpected lightness. Before she could respond, the door opened and Lieutenant Guzman entered, followed by 3 officers Jack didn't recognize. Members of the review board, she presumed. The formality of the setting reasserted itself, and they took their designated seats on opposite sides of the table. The hearing proceeded methodically. Jack recounted her experience again, answering pointed questions about her tone, her actions, her exact words. David testified next, his account aligning with hers on all substantive points. When Officer Walsh's turn came, his version diverged dramatically, claiming Jack had been belligerent, possibly intoxicated, and potentially reaching for something in her vehicle. That's absolutely false, Jack interjected when Walsh claimed she had cursed at him. Captain Williams, the senior board member warned, you'll have an opportunity to respond. Jack fell silent, her jaw tight with restraint. She caught David watching her, something like admiration in his expression at her composure. During a recess, they found themselves alone in the hallway, both needing distance from the tension of the hearing room. He's lying, Jack said quietly. I know, David replied. They know too. Then why the charade? Process. Documentation. Building a case that can withstand union challenges. He leaned against the wall. This isn't my first review board. Jack studied him. But it's different this time. Because of you. Because you're testifying against another officer. David nodded slowly. That too. A question had been nagging at Jack since their first reluctant conversation. Why did you do it? File the report, knowing the consequences. He didn't answer immediately, seeming to weigh his response. My grandfather was NYPD, he began finally. Old school. Tough but fair. When I was 12, I watched him confront his partner over roughing up a suspect. His partner said, "Nobody's watching, Joe." And my grandfather said, "I'm watching. My grandson's watching. God's watching." That's audience enough. The simple story revealed more about David than any personnel file could have. "He sounds like a good man," Jack said. He was. So was my dad, in his way. He struggled, though, drank too much, brought the job home. The stress ate at him. David's gaze turned distant. "He died on duty when I was 20. Heart attack during a domestic call." "I'm sorry," Jack said softly. "It's why I became an officer. To honor them both. To try to be the best of each without the worst." A rueful smile crossed his face. "Some days I do better than others." The vulnerability of his admission created an opening Jack hadn't anticipated. Perhaps it was the shared stress of the hearing, or perhaps something more fundamental, but she found herself reciprocating. "My father was Army. Career military," she said. "He believed in discipline, honor, service. All the things the recruitment posters promise." David turned toward her, giving her his full attention. "When I was 16, I told him I wanted to follow his path. He sat me down and said, 'Jackie, there are 2 battles you'll fight every day. The one in the field, and the one for respect. The second will exhaust you more than the first.'" Was he right? "Every day," Jack confirmed. "I've had commanding officers speak to my male colleagues instead of me, even when I outrank them. I've had suggestions ignored until a white male officer repeated them. I've been called aggressive for behaviors that earn men praise for leadership. And yet you stayed. Quitting would only prove them right." Jack straightened her jacket. "Besides, I'm good at what I do. Damn good." "I believe it," David said with such simple conviction that Jack felt momentarily disarmed. "What about you?" she asked. "After all this, will you stay?" The question hung between them, heavier than it might have seemed to an outsider. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to believe we can change things from within. But some days the wall seems too high to climb," she finished for him. "Exactly." Their eyes met in a moment of unexpected understanding. Jack saw in David something she recognized from her own journey: the weariness of fighting systems while trying to serve them, the cost of integrity in environments that often punished it. The door opened, breaking the moment. They were called back into the hearing. Hours later, it concluded with a statement that the board would deliberate and deliver findings within the week. Jack and David exited the building together, both emotionally drained. "Can I buy you a coffee?" David asked suddenly. Real coffee, not the departmental sludge. Jack hesitated. This would cross from professional obligation into something more personal. Yet after sharing pieces of their histories, the boundary already seemed to have blurred. "One coffee," she agreed. "I know a place near here." They walked in comfortable silence to a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a tailor shop. Inside, the warm aroma of freshly ground beans and the soft jazz soundtrack created a sanctuary from the tensions of the day. They found a corner table, ordered, and sat facing each other without the barrier of a hearing room between them. "Thank you," David said after their coffee arrived. "For what?" "For not backing down. For filing the complaint. For forcing accountability." Jack shook her head slightly. "I did it for myself, not for some larger purpose." "Does it matter?" "The effect is the same." "Intent always matters," she replied. "It's the difference between justice and vengeance." David considered this. "What would you have done if I hadn't filed my report? If I'd backed Walsh's version?" The question was direct, challenging. "I'd have gone higher," Jack said without hesitation. "Pentagon to mayor's office, if necessary. Justice Department if it came to that." "You'd have gone to war." "I'd have sought accountability," she corrected. "There's a difference." is there. From where I'm sitting, both leave casualties. Jack leaned forward slightly. The difference is in what you're fighting for. War is about defeat. Accountability is about correction. A smile ghosted across his lips. Now you sound like my grandfather. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. They fell into conversation that drifted from professional to personal and back again. Jack learned that David played guitar, had a rescue dog named Einstein, and volunteered teaching chess to kids in a community program. David discovered that Jack ran marathons, loved classical literature, and had never learned to swim despite her military training. Small revelations, ordinary details, the kind that transform colleagues into people, adversaries into potential friends. I should go, Jack said eventually, noticing the afternoon light fading outside the windows. I have reports to finish. Of course, David said, though neither moved immediately. This was unexpected, Jack admitted. The good kind of unexpected or the handcuffs kind of unexpected? He asked with a hint of self-deprecating humor. She surprised herself by laughing. The good kind. Definitely the good kind. As they parted outside the cafe, something had undeniably shifted between them. What had begun as an enforced proximity had evolved into something chosen, a connection neither had anticipated when they first locked eyes across a traffic stop. Jack walked to her car feeling strangely lighter despite the stress of the day. David watched her go, realizing that for the first time in weeks, he felt something like hope. 3 days after the hearing, Jack's phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Walsh suspended 30 days without pay. Mandatory retraining. Permanent record. Just got word. David. Jack stared at the message, a complex mix of emotions washing through her. Satisfaction that there had been consequences. Surprise that David had reached out to tell her. Uncertainty about how to respond. She typed, "Thank you for letting me know. Justice served." His response came quickly. Justice served. Not as severely as it could have been, but served. Jack hesitated, then added, "I appreciate you keeping me informed. And standing by your statement. Never had a doubt. How are you holding up?" The simple question caught her off guard. Few people in her life asked how she was with any genuine interest in the answer. Managing. Pentagon bureaucracy makes police paperwork look efficient. I find that hard to believe. Want to compare notes over dinner sometime? Jack felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. Was he asking her out? Or was this just collegial follow-up? Before she could overthink it, she typed, "I might be persuaded." When? Tomorrow. 7 p.m. I know a place with decent food and minimal chance of running into Walsh or his supporters. Works for me. Send details. She set her phone down, trying to ignore the smile that had crept onto her face. Commander Simmons appeared in her doorway, eyebrows raised. "Good news?" he asked. "Walsh got a 30-day suspension," Jack replied, composing her expression. "And a permanent mark on his record." Simmons nodded approvingly. Not insignificant. Satisfied. Jack considered the question. Yes, it's proportional. And Officer Harrington? Any repercussions for him? I don't know yet, she admitted, though she realized she cared about the answer more than she'd expected to. The following evening, Jack arrived at the restaurant David had suggested. An Ethiopian place tucked on a side street in a neighboring town, far from Alexandria PD territory. She spotted him immediately, seated at a corner table, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him in civilian clothes. Dark jeans and a navy button-down that complemented his eyes. "Captain," he greeted her with a warm smile, standing as she approached. "We're off duty, David. Jack is fine." "Jack," he repeated, as if trying the name for the first time. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for the update yesterday," she said as they sat. "And for suggesting dinner. I've been living on takeout and Pentagon cafeteria food for weeks." "Happy to provide a public service," he replied with a hint of humor. Though I should warn you, traditional Ethiopian dining involves sharing. I think I can handle that, Jack said, surprising herself with how comfortable she felt in his presence. They ordered a combination platter and Ethiopian honey wine. As they waited for their food, Jack noticed David seemed simultaneously more relaxed and more nervous than at their previous encounters. "How has it been at work?" she asked. "Any fallout?" "Some," he admitted. "I've been assigned to records duty for the foreseeable future. Desk job, no patrol." "That's punishment?" "In their eyes, yes. Honestly, it's peaceful. I catch up on paperwork, help civilians with reports, go home without adrenaline crashes." He shrugged. "Could be worse." "And socially?" "That's the worst part," David acknowledged. "Half the department won't speak to me. The other half only does when absolutely necessary." "I'm sorry," Jack said, genuinely concerned. "That can't be easy." "It's not," he agreed. "But for the first time in years, I can look at myself in the mirror without flinching. That's worth something." Their food arrived, a large platter with colorful mounds of spiced lentils, vegetables, and meat dishes arranged on injera bread. David demonstrated how to tear the bread and scoop the food, their fingers occasionally brushing as they shared the communal meal. "So," David said after they'd been eating in comfortable silence, "I've been wondering something." "What's that?" "Did you make that call? To the Pentagon? The one that ended careers?" Jack set down her wine glass. "Not exactly. I spoke with my commanding officer. He made calls to the mayor's office and the police commissioner." "Would you have gone further, I mean?" She considered the question seriously. "If necessary, yes. Not out of vengeance, but because abuse of power should have consequences." David nodded slowly. "That night, after it happened, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing your face when Walsh put the cuffs on you, this mixture of dignity and outrage. Like you were memorizing every detail for the reckoning to come." "I was," Jack admitted. "It made me realize how many times I've seen that same look and done nothing. Or not enough." He met her eyes directly. "You changed something for me, Jack. Made me remember why I put on the badge in the first place." The sincerity in his voice touched something in her. "My father would have liked you," she said unexpectedly. David looked surprised. "Why do you say that?" He valued moral courage above almost everything else. Standing up when it costs you something. She smiled slightly. He also had a thing about people who could admit when they were wrong. "I've had plenty of practice with that," David said with a self-deprecating laugh. The conversation flowed easily between them, moving from the investigation to their childhoods, professional challenges, and personal interests. Jack found herself sharing stories she rarely told anyone, about her father's battle with cancer, her mother's relentless attempts to see her settled with a nice man, her own struggles with balancing military discipline and personal warmth. David reciprocated with his own stories. Growing up as a police officer's son in a neighborhood where police weren't always trusted, his brief marriage that ended when his ex-wife couldn't handle the stress of being married to a cop, his ongoing efforts to live up to his grandfather's example. "What would he think?" Jack asked. "Your grandfather, about what happened with Walsh?" "He'd have been disappointed it took me so long to speak up," David said honestly. "But proud that I finally did." He hesitated. "Can I ask you something personal?" Jack nodded, curious. "Do you ever get tired of fighting? Of always having to prove yourself?" The question hit close to home. "Every day," she admitted. "Sometimes I wake up and think about how much energy it takes just to be taken seriously. To be heard. Yet you keep going. What's the alternative? Give up? Let them win?" She shook her head. "Not an option." "That's what I thought you'd say," David said with a smile that held both admiration and something warmer. "You're kind of remarkable, you know that?" Jack felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment, unfamiliar with receiving such direct appreciation. "I'm just doing my job." "No," David countered gently. "You're doing much more than that. You're changing things, making space, setting examples. Now you're making me sound like a crusader." "Maybe you are, a little bit." His eyes held hers. "That's not a bad thing." The intensity of his gaze made Jack glance away, uncharacteristically self-conscious. She'd built her career on professionalism and emotional control. This man somehow managed to slip past those defenses with simple observations that felt like revelations. They lingered over coffee, neither seeming eager to end the evening. When they finally left the restaurant, the night air was cool and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. "I'll walk you to your car," David offered. "Not necessary," Jack replied automatically. "I know. I'd like to anyway." They walked in comfortable silence, their shoulders occasionally brushing. At her car, Jack turned to face him. "I enjoyed tonight," she said. "More than I expected to." High praise, David teased. From potentially tolerable to enjoyed more than expected. "I'm moving up in the world." Jack laughed, a genuine unguarded sound that surprised them both. "That's not what I meant." "I know," he said, his expression growing more serious. "I enjoyed it too. Very much." A moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Jack found herself studying his face, noticing the kindness in his eyes, the slight crinkles at their corners, the way his mouth curved upward even in repose. "Would you like to do this again?" David asked, breaking the silence. "Yes," Jack answered without hesitation. "I would." His smile widened. "Good. That's good." Another pause, this one gentler. "Good night, David," Jack said finally, unlocking her car. "Good night, Jack," he replied, waiting as she got in and started the engine. As she drove away, Jack glanced in her rearview mirror to see him still standing there, watching her go. The warmth that spread through her chest had nothing to do with the Ethiopian spices and everything to do with the unexpected connection forming between them. A bridge across worlds that had begun with handcuffs and conflict but was becoming something else entirely. The weeks that followed unfolded in a series of dinners, coffees, and long conversations that deepened the connection between them. Jack found herself looking forward to David's texts, smiling at his dry observations about bureaucracy and his thoughtful questions about her day. David discovered in Jack someone who challenged and understood him in equal measure, who saw beyond the uniform to the man beneath. They were careful, meeting in places where they wouldn't encounter colleagues, keeping their growing relationship private. Neither was ready to define what was happening between them, but both recognized its significance. It was during their fifth dinner together, at a small Italian restaurant in Georgetown, that David first reached across the table to take her hand. The simple gesture felt monumental, a crossing of a line they'd been approaching for weeks. "I have something to tell you," he said, his expression a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Jack felt her heart quicken. "What is it?" "I've been offered a position with the state police. Training division. Teaching de-escalation techniques and ethical policing." "David, that's wonderful," Jack said, genuinely pleased for him. "Is this because of the Walsh case?" "Indirectly. A captain there was on the review board. Said they need more officers who understand the real-world challenges of standing up to misconduct." He squeezed her hand. "I start next month." "So you're leaving Alexandria PD?" "Yes. It's time." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "What do you think?" The question held layers of meaning beyond the professional change. "I think it sounds perfect for you," Jack said softly. "Using your experience to create positive change." Relief washed over his features. "That's what I hoped you'd say." Later that evening, standing outside her apartment door, their goodnight kiss held the promise of a future neither had anticipated when they first met. Jack felt herself opening to possibilities she'd long since dismissed as incompatible with her career and independence. 3 days later, everything shattered. Jack was in a budget meeting when her phone buzzed with a text from David. Need to talk. Urgent. Can you call when free? The uncharacteristic message sent a chill through her. She excused herself as soon as possible and called him from an empty conference room. What's wrong? She asked without preamble when he answered. Walsh is back, David said, his voice tight. Early reinstatement. And he's talking. About what? About us. He's been having us followed. Has photos of us together. Jack felt her stomach drop. That's not illegal. We're both single adults. He's not claiming it's illegal. He's claiming it's why I testified against him, that we were already involved before the incident, that we orchestrated the complaint together. That's absurd, Jack said, anger rising. We didn't even know each other. Facts don't matter to him. The narrative does. David's voice was strained. He's filing a formal complaint with Internal Affairs claiming conspiracy and perjury. And he's suggesting to anyone who'll listen that you used personal persuasion to get me to change my statement. The implication hung in the air between them, ugly and demeaning. That son of a... Jack caught herself. What's your department saying? That's the worst part. Some people believe him. Or pretend to. It gives them an excuse to dismiss what happened. David's frustration was palpable. My transfer to state police is now under review, pending the outcome. Jack paced the conference room, mind racing. This is character assassination. We need to fight back. With what? We can prove we weren't involved before the incident, but we can't deny we're involved now. That's enough to create doubt. So what are you saying? That we should have anticipated this? That we shouldn't have? She stopped, unable to finish the thought. No, David said firmly. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying we need to be prepared for how ugly this could get. Jack felt a cold resolve hardening within her. I need to make some calls. Jack, wait. I'll call you back, she said, ending the call. She immediately dialed General Lawrence, explaining the situation in direct military terms. The general listened without interruption. This is retaliation, plain and simple, she concluded. And it's targeting both of us. Understood, Captain, Lawrence replied. I'll contact the police commissioner directly. This stops now. Thank you, sir. Jack hung up, feeling a grim satisfaction. Walsh had picked the wrong opponent. Her phone rang almost immediately. David calling back. What did you do? He asked, a note of concern in his voice. What needed to be done? Jack replied. I called my commanding officer. He's contacting the commissioner. Silence greeted her answer. David, you should have discussed this with me first, he said finally, his voice unnaturally even. There wasn't time. Walsh is trying to destroy your career. Mine too, potentially. I understand that. But this isn't a military operation, Jack. You can't just call in airstrikes when things get difficult. The metaphor stung. That's not what I did. Isn't it? You immediately escalated to the highest possible level without considering alternatives. What alternatives? Jack demanded, frustration building. Let him spread lies about us? Watch your transfer disappear. Wait until his poison spreads through both our departments. We could have addressed this together, David insisted. Found a measured response. Now it looks exactly like what he's claiming. You using Pentagon connections to fight your personal battles. This isn't a personal battle, Jack said coldly. This is about integrity and accountability. The same things you supposedly value. The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. But it was too late. Supposedly, David repeated, the hurt evident in his voice. Right. Because clearly I'm just talking a good game. That's not what I meant. I think it is. You still don't fully trust that I'll do the right thing, do you? You still see me as the officer who stood by while you were handcuffed. That's not fair, isn't it? Then why not trust me to handle this my way? Why go nuclear immediately? Jack felt the conversation spiraling out of control. I was trying to protect you, to protect us. By treating me like I need protection? Like I can't fight my own battles? David's voice had hardened. I stood up to Walsh. I filed the report. I accepted the consequences. I don't need you to save me, Jack. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you don't believe I can handle this without your intervention. The accusation hit uncomfortably close to a truth Jack hadn't acknowledged. Her instinct to take control, to fix problems directly rather than allowing them to unfold. I believe in solving problems efficiently, she said finally. And I believe in solving them right, David countered. Not just effectively, but ethically. With consideration for all the consequences. The ethical solution is to stop Walsh from spreading lies. The ethical solution is to confront them directly, through proper channels, not to use extraordinary influence to circumvent the process. David's voice had grown quieter, which somehow made his words cut deeper. The same process you insisted on when filing your original complaint. Jack fell silent, the contradiction in her actions becoming painfully clear. I need some time, David said after a moment. To think. To figure out how to address the damage your call may have caused. Damage, Jack repeated incredulously. I was trying to help. I know you were. That's what makes this so difficult. He sighed, a sound heavy with disappointment. I'll call you when I've sorted things out. The line went dead before Jack could respond. She stared at her phone, a mixture of anger, confusion, and hurt churning within her. How had her attempt to protect what they were building turned into this? The hours that followed brought no communication from David. Jack threw herself into work, trying to distract herself from the ache of their first real conflict. When General Lawrence called to inform her that the commissioner had agreed to investigate Walsh for retaliation, she felt hollow victory rather than satisfaction. That evening, Jack sat alone in her apartment, replaying their conversation. Had she overstepped? Had her military instinct to address threats decisively undermined something more important? David's agency, his right to handle his own battles? She picked up her phone a dozen times to call him, but stopped herself each time. What would she say? That she was sorry for trying to protect him? That didn't feel true. That she understood his perspective? She wasn't sure she did. Across town, David sat on his balcony, nursing a beer and watching the city lights. Einstein, his German Shepherd mix, rested his head on David's knee, sensing his distress. I messed up, buddy, David murmured, scratching the dog's ears. Or she did. Maybe we both did. The truth was, Jack's intervention had left him feeling undermined, his professional autonomy questioned. Yet he understood her instinct to protect what they were building. The speed and decisiveness that made her an exceptional officer were the same qualities that had led to their conflict. His phone buzzed with a text from his captain. Commissioner's office called. IA investigating Walsh for retaliation. Your transfer approved effective immediately. What the hell did you do? David stared at the message, conflicted emotions washing through him. The outcome was what he wanted. The method was not. And the cost, potentially losing Jack, seemed suddenly unbearable. In separate locations, both confronted the same painful question. Was what they'd found worth fighting for? Or had their fundamental differences in approaching conflict created an unbridgeable divide? Neither slept well that night, the absence of communication between them speaking volumes about the fragility of what they'd begun to build. 3 days passed without contact, the longest they'd gone without speaking since their first dinner. Jack moved through her duties at the Pentagon with mechanical precision, her colleagues noting her uncharacteristic distraction but wisely choosing not to comment. In the empty silence of her apartment each evening, she replayed their argument, examining it from every angle. The more she reflected, the more she recognized the truth in David's words. She had acted unilaterally, following the chain of command that made sense in her world without considering the impact in his. On the fourth day, Jack found herself driving to Alexandria after work, no clear destination in mind. She passed the spot where Walsh had pulled her over months ago, the place where this complicated journey had begun. On impulse, she pulled over at the exact location, sitting in her idling car as twilight descended. Everything had changed since that night. She had changed, opened herself to possibilities she'd long since dismissed. The question now was whether she had the courage to acknowledge her mistake and risk rejection in attempting to repair the damage. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Mom," she answered, attempting normalcy. "Jacqueline." Her mother's voice held immediate concern. "What's wrong?" Jack smiled despite herself. Beatrice Williams had always possessed an uncanny ability to detect her daughter's emotional state, even across distances. "Nothing's wrong," she lied. "Ma'am," her mother hummed skeptically. "That's why you sound like you did when your father was sick. All composed on the surface and breaking underneath." The simple observation cracked something in Jack's careful control. "I met someone," she admitted, "and I think I ruined it." "Tell me," her mother said simply. So Jack did, explaining about the traffic stop, the complaint, the unexpected connection with David, and finally, their argument. "I was trying to protect him," she concluded, "to fix the problem." "The way you always do," her mother observed without judgment. "The way your father did." Jack hadn't considered the parallel. Dad would have done the same thing. Yes. And it would have been just as much of a mistake. Her mother's voice softened. "Your father was a wonderful man, but he sometimes forgot that protection isn't always what people need. Sometimes they need partnership." "I don't know how to fix this," Jack admitted, the confession difficult for someone accustomed to having solutions. "Yes, you do. You're just afraid." "I'm not afraid," Jack protested automatically. "Aren't you? Afraid he won't forgive you? Afraid that opening yourself to someone means risking pain? Afraid of needing someone after being self-sufficient for so long?" The accuracy of her mother's assessment was startling. "When did you get so insightful?" "I've always been insightful, darling. You've just been too busy being strong to notice." Beatrice's voice held a smile. "Now, what are you going to do about this man?" Jack looked out at the street where everything had begun. "I don't know if he wants to hear from me. Only one way to find out." After ending the call, Jack sat motionless for several minutes. Then she took out her phone and typed a simple message. "I'm at the place where we first met. If you're willing to talk, I'll be here for the next hour." She pressed send before she could reconsider, then settled in to wait, with no certainty that he would come. David was walking Einstein when the text arrived. He stared at the message, his heart rate accelerating at the unexpectedness of it. For 3 days, he'd been drafting and deleting messages to Jack, unable to find the right words to bridge the gulf between them. His anger had cooled, leaving behind the realization that he missed her. Her directness, her principles, even her sometimes frustrating decisiveness. The qualities that had led to their argument were inseparable from the woman he had come to care for deeply. "What do you think, buddy?" he asked Einstein, who tilted his head quizzically. "Should we go?" The dog's tail wagged as if in answer. David turned toward his apartment. Decision made. 20 minutes later, he parked behind Jack's car on the quiet residential street where their story had begun. She was sitting on a low wall nearby, her military bearing evident even in repose. She stood as he approached, her expression carefully neutral, though he detected uncertainty in her eyes. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "Neither was I," David admitted, stopping a few feet away. An awkward silence stretched between them. "I've been thinking," they both began simultaneously, then stopped. "You first," David said. Jack took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what you said. About how I handled the situation with Walsh. She met his eyes directly. You were right. I acted unilaterally, the way I would in a military context. I didn't consider how it would affect you professionally or personally. The admission clearly cost her something, and David felt his remaining anger begin to dissolve. I should have consulted you, she continued. Worked with you to address it together. Instead, I fell back on old patterns, taking control, solving problems through authority rather than collaboration. She hesitated. I'm sorry, David. The simple apology, delivered without qualification, touched him deeply. Thank you for saying that, he said quietly. I've been thinking, too, about why your actions bothered me so much. He moved closer. It wasn't just about professional autonomy. It was about feeling like you didn't trust me to handle things, like you still saw me as the officer who failed to intervene quickly enough that night. That's not true, Jack protested. Maybe not consciously, but there's a part of you that doesn't fully trust that I'll do the right thing when it counts. He held up a hand when she began to object. And maybe that's fair. Trust is earned over time, not in a few weeks of dinners. Jack studied him, her expression softening. I do trust you, David. More than I've trusted anyone in a long time. That's what makes this so. She gestured between them, searching for the word. Scary, he suggested. A smile touched her lips. I was going to say complicated, but scary works too. David closed the remaining distance between them. For what it's worth, Walsh has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into retaliation. And my transfer went through. I start with state police next week. That's good news, Jack said cautiously. It is. He took a deep breath. But more importantly, these past few days made me realize something. What's that? That I'd rather argue with you than be at peace with anyone else. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Jack's composed expression wavered, vulnerability showing through the cracks. I missed you, she admitted quietly. I'm not used to missing people. David reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. I missed you too. So where does that leave us? At a crossroads, I think. He intertwined their fingers. We can either decide this is too complicated, a military officer and a cop from different worlds with different approaches, or we can commit to figuring it out together. Working through these differences instead of letting them divide us. Jack looked down at their joined hands. I'm not very good at compromise, she warned. And I'm not very good at confrontation, he countered with a small smile. Maybe we balance each other. She met his eyes again, and David saw the decision there before she spoke. I want to try, she said simply. I want to figure this out. Relief and joy washed through him. So do I. He drew her closer, one hand gently cupping her face. No more unilateral decisions. I'll consult you before calling in the Pentagon, she promised with a hint of a smile. And you'll speak up sooner when something bothers you? Deal. Their kiss held the sweetness of reconciliation and the promise of something deeper. A commitment to navigate their differences together rather than allowing them to become divisions. When they finally parted, Jack rested her forehead against his. This isn't going to be easy, you know. The best things rarely are, David replied. They stood together on the street where their journey had begun, no longer adversaries or reluctant allies but partners choosing each other despite the complications. The path ahead would hold challenges, but in this moment, both recognized that what they'd found was worth fighting for. Not separately, but together. 6 months later, Jack adjusted her dress uniform in the mirror, ensuring every medal and insignia was perfectly aligned. The promotion ceremony would begin in an hour, captain to major, a significant step in her career trajectory. You look perfect, David said from the doorway of her bedroom, admiration evident in his eyes. Though you missed a spot. Where? She asked, alarmed, scanning her reflection. He approached with a smile, pretending to adjust an already perfect collar. "Nowhere. I just wanted an excuse to get closer." Jack laughed, the sound coming more easily these days. "Sneaky. Strategic," he corrected, slipping his arms around her waist. The past 6 months had been a journey of adjustment and growth for both of them. David had flourished in his new role with the State Police Training Division, developing curriculum that incorporated his first-hand experience with accountability and ethical decision-making. Jack had continued her Pentagon work while mentoring junior female officers, something she'd previously avoided but now embraced. Their relationship had weathered initial scrutiny, whispers about the circumstances of their meeting, questions about conflicts of interest. But as months passed, those concerns had faded in the face of their evident commitment to each other. "Nervous?" David asked, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders. "A little," Jack admitted. "It's a bigger audience than usual. General Lawrence insisted on making it a public ceremony since I'm one of the youngest women to reach this rank in my division. He's proud of you." "They all are." David kissed her temple. "I certainly am." Jack turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you for understanding about this weekend. I know you wanted to take that trip to the mountains." "The mountains will still be there next month," he said easily. "This is important." His simple acceptance struck Jack anew. Throughout their relationship, David had demonstrated a capacity for compromise that challenged her to reciprocate. She was learning, sometimes stumbling, sometimes succeeding, to meet him halfway. "I have something for you," she said suddenly, stepping away to retrieve a small box from her dresser. "A pre-promotion gift, I guess." David raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You're the one getting promoted. Shouldn't I be giving you something?" "Just open it," Jack said, uncharacteristically nervous. He lifted the lid to reveal a key. "Is this?" "To my apartment," Jack confirmed. "I thought maybe you could use it regularly or permanently if you wanted." The invitation, so difficult for her independent spirit to extend, hung between them. David's face broke into a wide smile. "Are you asking me to move in with you, Major Williams? I'm suggesting it might be more efficient than maintaining 2 residences when we spend most nights together anyway," she replied with mock formality, though her eyes betrayed her vulnerability. David pulled her close again. "I love you too, Jack." She laughed against his shoulder. "I didn't actually say that part." "You didn't have to. I speak fluent Jack Williams now." His expression grew more serious. "And yes, I'd love to move in. Einstein too." "The furball is non-negotiable," Jack agreed with a smile. "He's grown on me." David kissed her softly. "Thank you for trusting me with this." "With you." The simple acknowledgement touched her deeply. Trust had been their cornerstone and their challenge. Learning to rely on each other without surrendering independence, to be vulnerable without feeling weak. "We should go," Jack said, checking her watch. "I can't be late to my own promotion." The ceremony unfolded with military precision at the Pentagon auditorium. Jack stood tall as General Lawrence recited her accomplishments and service record. From his seat in the front row, David watched with pride as she accepted her new insignia, her face composed in the professional mask she wore in public settings. Only he could detect the subtle signs of emotion, the slight flush on her cheeks, the momentary softening around her eyes when she glanced his way. He had learned to read the language of her restraint, to see the depth of feeling beneath the disciplined exterior. At the reception afterward, they navigated the crowd together, Jack introducing David to colleagues and superiors with a confidence that acknowledged his importance in her life. He, in turn, engaged effortlessly with the military personnel, his natural warmth bridging the gap between their worlds. "Major Williams," called a familiar voice. They turned to find Commander Simmons approaching with a glass of champagne. "Congratulations on a well-deserved promotion." "Thank you, Commander," Jack replied. Simmons nodded to David. "Mr. Harrington, I understand your training program is garnering attention statewide." Word travels, David said with surprise. I make it my business to stay informed, Simmons replied. Especially when it concerns officers who understand the importance of accountability. He raised his glass slightly. To both of you, you've turned an unfortunate incident into something constructive. That's commendable. After Simmons moved on, David leaned closer to Jack. How much does he know about us? Enough, Jack said with a small smile. He has a way of knowing things. Later, as the reception wound down, they found a quiet moment alone in a corner of the hall. Happy? David asked, his hand finding hers discreetly. Yes, Jack said, realizing the simple answer was completely true. Though I'm ready to get out of this uniform and into something more comfortable. I can help with that, he offered with a suggestive smile. Jack laughed softly. I'm sure you can. But first, there's somewhere I want to go. The quiet Alexandria Street looked different in daylight, ordinary and unassuming. Jack parked in the exact spot where Walsh had pulled her over that fateful night, David in the passenger seat beside her. Why here? He asked curiously. Jack turned off the engine and faced him. Because this is where everything changed. Where I became someone who filed complaints instead of accepting injustice. Where you became someone who spoke up instead of standing by. She took his hand. Where we began, even if we didn't know it yet. David's expression softened with understanding. From handcuffs to house keys. Quite a journey. One I never expected to make, Jack admitted. I was so focused on my career, on proving myself, that I never made space for something like this. She gestured between them. For someone like you. And now I'm learning that strength can include vulnerability. That independence doesn't have to mean isolation. She smiled. That justice and love aren't separate pursuits but interconnected ones. David leaned across to kiss her gently. That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said, Major. Don't get used to it, she warned, though her eyes betrayed her. Too late, he replied. I'm already used to you. To us. As they sat together in the place where their unlikely story began, both reflected on the distance they had traveled, not just from adversaries to lovers, but from rigid certainty to open possibility. What had started with handcuffs and conflict had transformed into something neither could have anticipated. A partnership built on respect, understanding, and the courage to choose each other despite their differences. Their worlds, military and law enforcement, would always present challenges. Their approaches would sometimes diverge. But in finding each other, they had discovered that the most unexpected connections often prove the most enduring, and that love, like justice, requires both accountability and forgiveness to truly transform lives. How might our most difficult encounters become doorways to unexpected connection? When has confronting injustice in your life led to something more meaningful than you could have imagined?